Hey everyone, welcome to episode 130 of the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast, which is really 280. I keep hinting that I'm going to have to renumber these things given the old legacy and my old podcast partner, Dean Guido. But I'm your host, Andrew Coates, and I have a really cool guest today, someone I've been planning to get on for a while. So I'll sort of preface with this. Like, the industry has hundreds, if not thousands, of really smart, successful business owners, fitness professionals, gym owners who I think are doing great work. Some people have really high, big social media profiles, some not quite as crazy. And there's no way in the world I can get everybody on here, but I do try to pull people out who I'm interested in having that conversation with and getting to know a bit more. And so I'm happy to welcome Michael Ranfone. We have been chatting back and forth on social media for a little while. And Michael's the owner of Ranfone Training Systems, that's in Connecticut, and also Ranfone Performance Consulting, which is more the online performance coaching wing of what you do. So welcome. It's great to have you.
Well, absolutely a pleasure to be here. I know we've been talking back and forth, like we discussed earlier about, when are we actually going to meet? When are we actually going to talk? So I'm glad this moment has finally arrived.
Chances are we'll get half the people who I first connected with through the podcast I've met in person at some way, shape, or form, spoken at an event together, et cetera. So it always eventually happens with how much travel I get to do. You also recently, you appeared at GymCon, you spoke there. The Hormozis were kind of some of the headliners with that. There's a lot of really big names in the industry. My recent guest and pal, Santana Anderson, I know was there as well. He's a good dude. It's incredible
Really?
just how like jacked and huge he still is as an IFBB pro, right? But I guess the thing I'm most interested in starting with is, again, you've been doing this a while. You're a veteran of the industry, and you're both a facility owner, and you built the online consulting side of things as well. How do you see the traditional career path, the evolution of the generation that you came up in, which for sure predated the opportunities that social media presented? And what's possible, and what you see now that's possible and is happening for, I guess, the newer generation, the fitness professionals who probably have started their careers with the potential for social media. Like, has anything fundamentally changed with the trajectory that you follow, or anything else that you've observed?
So I gotta date this a little bit. So I've been in strength and conditioning for 20 years. So
Right.
in any industry, there's been some changes, right? And I think the biggest thing is just the optionality at which you can at least immerse yourself in the field, right? 20 years ago, having a CSCS was the gold standard. Like that meant you, for whatever it's worth, it was like you were privileged to have that thing. Now it's like, do certifications really matter? Does your internship matter? Does your social media matter? So the optionality, and there's pros and cons to these things, but I think you have a lot more choices to how you want to groom yourself and introduce yourself to your audience or market. That's the number one thing.
Because I think coaches do see the allure of the social media side of stuff. And, I also am biased because I've been in the industry 12 and a half years. And I mean, I used to post on Facebook a fair bit, and Instagram growth, that has been a thing over the last, say, 3.5 years. But predating that, it was really focused on training the client in front of you, local word of mouth, staying busy, all that stuff. And then started dabbling in more things, started writing, etc. But there are a lot of really brilliant, reputable people who really well known, who don't necessarily have the big social media following. I was talking with my friend Melody Schoenfeld today. She's a great example. Or, my buddy Robert Linkle is another one. Chad Landers, who owns a gym out in the West Coast. They've all been podcast guests before. They're all great people. All three happen to be former NSCA Personal Trainer of the Year award winners, which is nice too. And then, yeah, sure. And we get a lot of people, I think I use Luca as a really good example. Don Saladino is another one who they're the credible coaches. They've done it. They've built the businesses. They've owned the gyms. The proof is there, but they've also done extraordinarily well with the bigger brand. The social media is sort of an extension of that brand. And I enjoy teasing out, each individual's, the stuff that's made each individual successful and what they've observed in the everything around them with everybody else. So I guess maybe we can redirect this. And are there any things that have been really critical in where you are in your career? And has anything changed more recently?
Well, I think you hit the nail right on the head about just, being good at what you do. Right. And somewhere along the lines, like with whether it be social media or the plethora of continuing ed, people forget they still have to produce a result that they're being compensated for. So, and that to me is just a matter of reps or hours or, under the bar that people think they can circumvent and still have success in the industry. And again, if you have an audience, a vast audience that you paid to acquire, you can probably figure out a way to monetize it. But that doesn't relieve you from the fact that you should be pretty fucking good at what you do, be able to have some organizational integrity, producing a result in the timely manner for the whatever agreed price was, and be able to repeat that success over and over again, and also know who you serve and who you don't. Right. And that's something I think, because I was kind of forged in this industry in a very particular setting, and social media had nothing to do with your success. Right. So it was really, you get paid to produce a result. And that's something that I try to impress upon any coach at any point in their career. It's like, if you do good work, the results will speak for themselves. So don't get 10,000 followers and have nothing to sell them. Right. I mean, it seems like they just want to put the cart before the horse. And maybe this is just my biased belief. It's like, if you're good at what you do, people will find you. You will get referrals, which is a great source of client acquisition. But it's not as sexy, and it takes a little longer and a little harder.
Well, if we think about it, before social media, what were the gatekeepers essentially? For anybody who was well known in the industry, they were well known because they were published or featured on the small number of publications that were out there, right?
Yeah.
And that's sort of a type of gatekeeping. But its success within the business is its own gatekeeper. So if you had the gym, but the gym wasn't paying its bills and it doesn't survive, I mean, the fact that someone had a successful gym is proof. Your Alan Cosgroves, your Mike Boyles, and I just had my good friend Pete Dupuis on here. So like Pete and Tony Gentilcore was originally part of that, and Eric Cressy. You look at what anybody who knows Lucas' story, what he did, and again, Don with Drive 495 in Manhattan for 15 years, right? Like the stories of the stuff they had to do to make their gym successful. It all looks easy in the retelling, but there are some wild times. Like Don will talk about some of the stuff he had to do just to make payroll during like tough times, given like just how much rent is in Manhattan, for example. So I think that serves as its own gatekeeper. I think what you're alluding to is, and again, I'm very careful not to. Social media has been very good to me, so I don't try to discourage people from social media.
Not
But
at all.
you can fake an image and the appearance of status and success with social media in a way that you simply couldn't as a gym owner or in any of the traditional formats, right? It'd be very, very hard to not know your shit and get onto a Muscle and Fitness or a T Nation back in the day and carve out sort of a career out of it. So is there anything within that you'd say to, the newest generation of coaches and how they would approach their careers that includes social media? Beyond just, hey, you got to be good at what you do. You got to deliver results.
Well, yeah, I think social media serves us all well to a certain extent. It's just, how do you want it to serve you is the question at some point. So, and I also find it just interesting, especially in the last couple of years, the prominence of internet coaches to coach business owners and, telling the story. So this counterfeit type of approach, I don't think serves anyone well. And I'm more concerned with the end user, right? Because I have a very client-centric model, and whether I'm coaching a fitness enthusiast or a coach or a business owner, like I want to be very pointed with their time, appreciate their attention, and give them the best ROI for their investment, whether that is time, money, resources, whatever. So I think just being very particular about what you want to accomplish with the relationship you're going to build via social media, in person, whatever other strategy you want to employ, should be should predicate everything that you do off of that. And if you like, making money is one thing. And listen, I'm a capitalist. I have no problem with making money, right? Like, and that's something that has served me well in the back half of my career. In the beginning, I was this kind of idealist, like, I don't need money. It's not about the money. It's not a great business ideology to not make money. Funny, right?
When two things. First of all, how much did that idealism show up in the form of you just taking such good care of your clients that it paid for itself anyway, and it put you in a position where you are now to be able to really capitalize on it? And two, what keeps you clear on who you want to serve, as you said, the end user?
Well, that's a great question. So again, I'm 20 years or so I'm a little bit more specific at this point. I started with athletic development, so all I want to do is train athletes, and that's because my identity was still an athlete, a competitive athlete myself, and I kind of looked at myself as almost like a big brother figure to a lot of the people that I worked with. So, teenagers, people aspiring to play collegiate sports, trying to get professional or whatever, advance their career. And then when I, really hit, fatherhood and marriage, and I was like, I'm not really an athlete like that anymore. So my relatability with them now, I wasn't really Big Brother Mike. I was like maybe Uncle Mike, which is still a cool hat to wear, but it's like it didn't serve me the same way. So there's got to be some kind of reciprocal nature about the relationship. And then I just started, going through my own struggles as a new father. Now I have a business, your parents start getting older, and now all of a sudden you're an adult. So the things that I was facing, I was like, well, I am a coach. I want to be a coach. So my identity as a coach is as who I am first. What are the things that I am trying to solve for myself that now I can provide some benefit, some oversight, some guidance to the next person? And that's not the teenage athlete. So my client avatar has shifted heavily to, I would say more of like a type A personality. Most of them have, are in the entrepreneurial space or some kind of profession that really demands the most of them. And at some point, they probably paid for their success through their own health, which is a story that I've lived numerous times, whether I was an athlete, a student athlete, so on and so forth, but especially as a business owner and a young father, I just sacrificed my own well-being because I thought this other thing was more important at the time.
How common is that story? You made me think, it's sort of a side note, but the identity of being the athlete and then of course shifting to the coach. And it makes me think of some of my friends and the people I know in the industry who I suspect that the identity of the athlete was there, but then you get something like, you probably know Andy McCloy, right? Andy,
Yeah.
smart business owner. Andy, if I'm not mistaken, I think, yeah, he had both hips replaced. And I mean, like, shit, that's probably around like 40 years of age. Or my buddy Lee Boyce, like Lee, double knee replacement, right? And again, like very strong identity grounded in being an athlete. He's still a pretty young guy. He still moves really well. But I wonder just how many other coaches struggle with holding on to that identity as the athlete first. And then to the point where, I mean, these are also examples and there's specifics. These are not necessarily people who like broke themselves down. There's stuff that happens, right? But most coaches aren't getting double joint replacements in their mid to late 30s.
Right.
Any other thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, so it's funny because as an athlete, especially a collegiate athlete, your career ends very quickly. And the whole thing that you based your identity on was being that. So this was almost like a life extension of that identity, is getting into strength and conditioning, still being in, a team setting, a high performance setting. But now you're just kind of at the top of the totem pole, right? So the next real shift in mindset or operational headspace is like, well, am I doing the best to serve me with this belief that I have to be this thing for this person? And that's kind of the fundamental question that I think we have to ask ourselves repeatedly through our careers. And now I'm very, very fortunate to have, the next iteration of the 25-year-old me as an employee. So he can serve that role, because I still think that's very important for young athletes, young men and women looking to excel in their given endeavor, and making sure that there's a role model in front of them that can kind of point the way. so that we can hook up and link up and mesh well psychologically more than anything else.
So what about the identity of the gym owner, right? How is that
Oh,
something that became sort of a, a piece along the way? Because again, I'm a big believer that a lot of the people that probably came from your particular starting point in generation, if you went to leave the commercial gym, the next step of the evolution, the only option was the gym owner, because online coaching was absolute niche infancy of a few select people, and it wasn't normalized amongst the general population, so therefore people weren't seeking it. And I mean, obviously social media wasn't a thing, and there probably were a handful of people who were doing reasonably well with writing, but even writing, it takes a lot to be paid, a
yeah.
livelihood, full-time writing, right? Like I write for a
Be
bunch of
prolific.
publications, and it's a tiny portion of my income. But then you stepped into the online business yourself. So was there an identity shift to be able to expand? And I'm actually really curious about, was this sort of an organic evolution to go from just being the facility owner to, the online brand as well? What allowed you to do that? Yeah.
Yeah, so it was actually a tactical consideration that I wanted to make in the summer of 2019. So having a brick and mortar location, you're probably going to deal with your client not or I should say this, the average drive time for a local gym is about 20 minutes. And where we are, 20 minutes only gets you about 6-7 miles away from us. So not a great area to pull from. So I had this idea of, well, what if we could extend it by offering some kind of online support? So maybe if you couldn't come down 3, 4, 5 times a week, you come down once a while, but you have all this infrastructure, the software and the guidance, remotely delivered. And I remember presenting it to my staff in a meeting, and everyone was very lukewarm. They're like, why are we doing this? Like, we're fine. And I'm like, no, this is gonna be big, So we ran it for about a month, and no one really, like, I did a terrible job selling it, obviously, because there was no conviction on the staff side, but the numbers didn't show that that was working. Like, people didn't want that. People were either going to come here and train or just go somewhere else that's more convenient for them. So I stopped it. I just put the program on the shelf, whatever. But we invested in the software. I built out the programming, the nutrition, all the accountability measures, blah blah blah. So fast forward about 5 months, we get shut down for the pandemic. So
Yep.
fortunately, I had all of these resources ready to go. So one of the
Mm.
big saving graces of this is we were able to flip about 90% of our in-person membership to online. And then we started to market it for people to kind of get a taste of what we do with certain trials and, advertising and stuff like that. But that's also when I decided to go all in on differentiating me from the business.
Mm.
So I actually had a pretty good following social media wise, even though I'd never done anything with it. I started just saying that this is what I do now, that this is an opportunity, that I'm taking it public, so to speak. And that's where we kind of like made the differential in brands of, RTS versus RPC. And it just happened to be a good time where some people really wanted to make sure that during the pandemic and shutdowns, they weren't allowing their health to degrade.
And there are a lot of people who are, you know, people people will complain, oh, these people were lucky, right? And they miss something crucial there, because there's two elements to this. Looking backwards, most of the time when people are lucky, there's a whole lot of stuff that went into a legacy of work, you name it. You happen to, I think you had the good fortune of having put this infrastructure together. I mean, yes, there's an element of luck. Sure, we know that. But you put yourself in a position to benefit from the luck, which is the thing that a lot of people misunderstand. They want to get lucky, but they haven't done anything to actually benefit from luck when it happens. And then two, it's the assumption that, well, oh, I missed that opportunity. There will be other opportunities. We are damn well hoping that we never see another like mass closure of everything the way that we did. And I personally, I don't think so. I don't think that's going to happen. But society changes at a fairly rapid pace.
Right.
Things will happen, right? The paradigms will shift, different types of media grow, etc. And every time a new big social media platform has come along, which probably happens at every like, what's maybe 7 to 8 years, I think is probably a cycle that we've seen. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, etc. Right? Will there be another one that a slightly younger generation probably, gravitates to? It's very possible. And so what ends up happening in the early adopters? I mean, look at some of the people who are the earliest adopters of Twitter. Who was it? Ashton Kutcher was huge and early on Twitter. And actually that did a ton for his career, right? So if you understand the fundamentals of why these networks and these systems work and how to actually like build a solid business that delivers results and keeps people happy, and then, should whatever come, hopefully you're in a position then to benefit from the next paradigm shift, the next situation that, because again, we may not see something on like a global scale like that, but what about you on a local scale? And you may be in a position to benefit, and we don't want to wish ill on anyone else, but how many people within the industry weren't prepared for this in any way, shape, or form, didn't react quickly enough? Gyms went out of business, which was terrible. People left the industry, which is terrible. But that's the other side that we forget sometimes. And then how many people are people like yourself who leaned into something and thrived? There will always be people who will miss the opportunity. So my point is if you just are vigilant and you invest in yourself and your own education and smart infrastructure, you will probably be in position to benefit from the next unexpected shock. I think going and reading Nassim Taleb's book, Anti-Fragile, probably a really good philosophy to kind of get your head around this stuff. Thoughts?
Yeah, without a doubt. And I mean, I distinctly remember when I first had my team meeting after the shutdown, I told them that like this was the plan. Like we were going to do this. And I know that this wasn't what you signed up for as a staff member here to, fulfill remotely and online and figure all this stuff out. And I gave everyone a free pass. I'm like, if you want to get out now. And I still respect you. I understand. But if you're going to stay, you're going to stay to work, and we're going to go all in on this thing. And I try to impress upon them that there's in every chaotic situation and event, there is opportunity. And that people will opt out or they'll rise up. Like that's it. And this might sound real controversial to, some people, but I think some of the gyms that you saw go away and people leave, it was just a matter of timeline. The pandemic didn't do it. It just sped it up. And you can say that with the marriages that were ruined or relationships that went away. They probably weren't stable enough to handle the real adversity that life will throw at you at some point, because that's the only thing you can really count on. So
all this accelerated a lot of trends. I mean, a lot of people talk about how the growth of online coaching, it probably sped up the mass adoption of online coaching by a significant degree. It may have condensed, 5 years worth into the space of like 3 to 6 months. And again, another good example of like being able to benefit from luck is Jonathan Goodman Online Trainer Academy, right? Yeah. Now there are tons of credible and grifting individuals in our industry who sell online coaching models and systems. But the original, the first and the most comprehensive was always Jonathan Goodman, because John placed a bet on again, this is Nassim Taleb stuff, but this like fat tail, disproportionate opportunity on one end of everything. And he invested really hard in it. And when this all came crashing down, he was in a position to benefit most financially. Now, of course, something that Jonathan talks about too is the fact that he also got probably 3 to 5 years worth of demand in the space of 3 to 6 months. Right. And of course, that also is not sustainable. So then he also had to think, okay, well, I have to shift and pivot because I also know what's coming, right? These electronic funds transfers, they're going to diminish very rapidly, very quickly. And of course, he has through his media. So what else what happened as you did go into this online model? Did anything change for you? Your identity within, the industry as a whole, where you see your brand going forward, any of this stuff? Did it change who you thought you'd be and the career path you were on?
Not necessarily. You know what? I think what happens a lot with any business owner, and maybe in particular gym owners, is that once they reach a certain level of success, they get distracted by things that wouldn't sometimes distract them. And I'm so guilty of this. Like I like solving problems. I like trying to figure stuff out, which is another actually upside of the pandemic, because now we had to figure it out or figure a way out. Right. So having done the online thing, changing that around, and then when we started getting people back, I still had this online machine going on. So now do I divert resources? Do I hire more people? So now there's just a new set of problems to deal with. The problems don't really go away. You just deal with different shit. And fast forward to this present day, I can honestly say I've probably have been the worst I've ever been at business ownership in the last year because it got easy. And I again, this is something I told my staff and I apologize to them for. I'm like, I let my foot off the gas. And we're not in the like we're still right where we need to be, both in brick and mortar and on the remote side. But it's you get to a point of good enough, and then you get complacent. And something that I didn't like how that was now my identity for at least the last couple months. So I had to renew my commitment by saying, like, actually stating what my intentions were for the business this year. And it is a really big investment, both in labor, resources. I'm just going back to all in on the brick and mortar, because I think that's where we are. Like, the trend lines are showing that there's more and more demand there, and like, yes, the online stuff is cool and the margins are great and blah, blah, blah. But the brick and mortar is what makes me most happy. And yet that's probably part of my discomfort or disconnect in the last years. Like, I really have not been involved as much as I could have been or should have been. So that's my pledge to the business right now, is I'm just going to go all in on the brick and mortar.
So with that, seeing it through that lens, what do you then say to the coaches who are rushing to go exclusively online?
Well, again, maybe that's your best option. But that also has to serve your skill set, your character. Like, online's not easy. That it's still a business. So the rules of business still apply. Like, you have to have the beliefs that serve you, the character traits that serve you and your clients, and you have to have a different set of skills. I mean, I know some of my in-person trainers really struggled with online fulfillment because it was such based in, like, the connectivity that you garner through real person interactions. So they felt like it was more sterile. And in the beginning, I had people doing both. Like, when we got to open up again, I was like, oh, everyone can do both. And that was a horrible mistake by me. Right. So I was like, oh, well, these guys are better with time management and communication and, the way that we fulfill in an online setting. And these guys are way better in person. So it was almost a division of labor for what that labor has to do from a coaching standpoint.
Yeah, and I guess it's also like people self-select to what they enjoy more, what they're fulfilled by. I found I struggled with online coaching earlier on. Like, I think the first time anybody wanted me to do it would have been 7.5 years ago. And I was mucking around spreadsheets and I wasn't efficient with them, and I just did not enjoy it. I didn't build any systems. And over time, I kind of just didn't bother investing in it. I knew other people were doing it. It was growing. It's still not where it was right now. It's not as ubiquitous. And then I had another person years ago inquire about it. She was with me for a really long time. So I figured, all right, we'll figure this out. And by this point now, I'd met Sam Pogue, who was speaking at Luca's 2017 Vigor Ground Fitness and Business Conference. So it's a mouthful. And so Sam at the time then became the VP at True Coach. So he wanted to talk to me about it, showed it to me. I was like, all right, cool. I like the software. And so I started using it, right? I'm give him a shout. I openly endorse John Goodman's Quick Coach too, right? John's taking me on the personal tour. And I mean, it's phenomenal stuff. But certainly at the time, True Coach was the option for me. So then, I started using it. And okay, cool. Like, I'm creating these programs and, I'm whatever, but I just didn't feel fulfilled by it. I didn't feel like I was able to have anywhere near the impact as the in-person coach. And probably a lot of people listening will relate to this. And it was an appearance, a conversation with my pal, PJ Street. And PJ's done a bunch of writing for T Nation. He does a lot of online coaching. And it was him talking about just how much he uses voice messages. And of course, anybody who knows me, has interacted with me on social media, knows I send a lot of voice messages now. But I struggled to adopt it early. It wasn't like a normal thing. And then something tipped. And I can't remember the point, but all of a sudden I started doing it a lot. And then as Instagram and social media grew, I would respond to a lot of people with voice messages. And the impact, I actually think it's one of the most critical drivers to why my social media grew, is because of the engagement that occurred as people are sharing my stuff. I'm sending thank you messages, etc. And video messages goes a long way with this stuff, very personal. But I think that it was when I started sending voice messages and video messages to my online clients to add that extra layer of touch point and checking in. It can go a long way towards replicating a lot of what you get with the in-person experience. It humanizes you. It humanizes the person on the other end. I think you're more invested in everything. And that was the single change in behavior that turned me from a lackluster, like, and I will say mediocre online coach in its earliest inception into where I honestly feel that on average, my online clients get a better pace of results than my in-person. Now, there's an element to that. Self-selection, which is where I want to go next, but I'll explain it. I find that the people who self-select online coaching tend to be driven and relatively independent. They don't need the in-person hand-holding. Otherwise, they would literally hire an in-person coach. But they want structure, they want accountability, they want the things that online offers best. And if you then deepen the relationship, it's a magic formula for success, and they execute and they crush. The in-person clientele often are the people who self-select to. I had a client in the last few days who is going through a fair bit of challenge and physically and just their stuff and busy and you name it. I won't get specific. There's some medical stuff there, but that client needed to come in and we probably got, I think, 4 sets of a upper body exercise and 3 sets of a lower body exercise in an hour because that client needed to sit down and share and talk about everything that was going on. And at the end of the session, the client profoundly thanked me for just listening and being empathetic and letting her do all that. And that was a big difference maker. And then talked about some stuff that she would execute in her, her everyday life because we want to have that impact. And that's not every in-person client because some of them are really driven and serious. But I find that the in-person clients, oftentimes they are seeking a relationship, especially the ones that are the long-term clients. And that's the key. In both cases, the deepening of the relationship is what will keep the client and drive their long-term results. So now self-selection, rambled a bit there. So how do you approach, offering this high-end program, right?
Yep.
And having the right people self-select to it?
Well, I think the first thing is just being really candid about like what your program is offering, right? So they go through a pretty extensive, they have to fill out an application. So we weed people out through the whole process. So they don't even get to me. They have to talk to my GM who kind of pre-screens them, asks them some follow-up questions. And then if they have any apprehensions, you don't have to talk to me, but essentially like if they want to proceed, they have to then schedule a call with me. So it's a very deliberate filtration system that we have in place. So by the time you get to me, you probably have a pretty good understanding that it's not your run of the mill. I'm going to buy an Excel sheet off of some random train. You know what I mean? So there is some self-selection just there. It's like, wow, this guy means business already. So we're going to get those type A people that are like, no, this is, I want to be accountable. I want someone to press me, and then when they talk to me, like I literally talk to people for an hour. I have some questions that I'm going to ask. And then we're going to decide, like, my goal is not to get you to buy shit. My goal is to decide what is best with you, how to move forward. And that might not mean me or with one of my staff or another program in its totality. But you're going to understand what you're getting and what you're signing up for. And that's basically the commitment to yourself.
Do you think a lot of coaches are too willing to take anybody that will offer them money?
100%. Yeah.
So how do you get the coach to trust in filtering people a little bit more, being a bit more discerning in who you allow to work with you and how you approach marketing?
Well, I think they have to be a little bit more introspective and look at like, here's an easy exercise to do. Look at your client roster right now and in some way, shape, or form, grade them and take your top 10%. And that might mean, the A clients, the guys that pay you the most, whatever, filter them out and just look at your top 10 favorite clients and then try to put together some kind of psychological profile, psychographic, demographic, whatever you got to do, but standardize that top 10 and then think about the problems that you solve for them, think about the solutions you've been able to provide, why you like seeing them in person, why you like dealing with them. And because everyone's got baggage. It's just like, do you want to carry it? So like, what baggage do you want to carry? What kind of things do you want to provide for them? And then speak to that person through the loudspeaker of social media or however you market, right? And I always say this, it's kind of cliche, but become your client's search engine. Like, you do a great job of talking about very specific things for specific people, right? I know if I go to your Instagram, I know I'm going to get some very good insightful coaching tips on how to manage myself, how to treat a client better, how to program. So I know what I'm getting from your brand for the most part. Most clients are just selling general weight loss or this, like, and it means nothing. Like, you can't even, how do you sell health? You know what I mean? So stop doing generic based approaches and be very specific. Like, solve the woman that had her third kid and she has never returned to her body type when she was 28. And it's like, solve the specific problems of your avatar based on the things that you've already done for your avatar, and just get more of those. So if you took your top 10% and only had a roster full of them, how great would your life be?
And there's a flip side to this too. And you probably read the book Yourself Solid by Michael Port, because it's
I haven't.
Oh shit. Well, the first third of this book, it's phenomenal. I recommend it to any trainer. In fact, I think it's essential reading. You would get a lot out of this too, just because it'll confirm a lot of stuff you know. So there's creating everything you said for the top 10%, but there's also taking a look at who are the 10 to 20% of your clientele that cause you the most stress, the ones that you, for lack of a better way of explaining it, you dread dealing with a little bit, but the ones that you catch yourself chasing the most, putting the most time and effort into, they're the ones that cancel most often. They're the ones that don't want to be charged for canceling. And yet they're the ones that you feel, well, if I lose thing people, I'm in financial trouble, right? And it becomes a really vicious cycle of catering to, focusing on those people. Then you've got all the stress and negative energy, which your other clientele feel, the people that you interact with everywhere feel, because you are a little more desperate. And that doesn't attract, we're talking about the law of attraction here fundamentally, but then that doesn't attract the right kind of person. You have to make the hard choice to say, okay, I need to politely and professionally divest myself of the clients that are causing you the problems, the grief, the ones that stress you out about scheduling, the ones that cancel. And something magical is going to happen. It's going to give you a sense of relief that you're not dealing with it anymore. Okay. Don't be an asshole. Don't brag about firing them on social media. I hate that. That's really unprofessional. But just professionally say, listen, I'm going to take you out of my schedule. Clearly things aren't really working out in your world right now. So, we can have a conversation in future, and set your terms and set your boundaries, right? If you can reestablish boundaries with the client who behaves this way, you may be able to save it, but it has to be a pretty firm boundary and you cannot compromise on that boundary. But it's generally better to just let the clients go. And then as you interact with the world, with better energy, more people will come to you, especially if you continue to do the things you've always done well. And if your energy is better and you're less distracted, but those clients that are draining you, then you pour yourself into the existing clientele, which keeps those clients happy, keeps them going. They're more likely to refer you business, have those conversations, and you can gradually shift towards a better type of client. And in future, be on guard and set boundaries against the type of client that behaves with these red flag behaviors. And one of the first and most obvious red flag behaviors is when people are looking for discounts. It's not universal, but people who are shopping on price will leave you if they find a better price, in a way. And you are commoditizing yourself. And a mistake a lot of coaches make is they end up becoming an interchangeable commodity with a lot of the other coaches that are out there. And as you alluded to, the social media becomes a generic extension of that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say you're spot on with like the commoditization of services, right? And I think people do an injustice to themselves by not having a differentiated product. Don't stop selling memberships, stop selling programs, sell solutions, right? Sell the result of what your perfect client needs, and then be the sole provider for that solution. Be in the product of one against everyone else and everything else out there. And that's probably the biggest upside of social media, because you can create these micro brands of problem solving, you know, and if you do problem solving well, your value can only go up. It doesn't get worse. So yeah, they can look at my gym or Planet Fitness and be like, well, there's a 5x difference there. It's like, yeah, but what are you getting? What problem are you solving by going to Planet Fitness that has no dedicated training, nutrition, accountability, lifestyle integration, personal touch, blah, 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 blah. And like, how long are you going to go and pay this $10 fee or whatever it is, not get the result you want, and have the problem you've been dealing with for the last 15 years for the next 15 years? Right. And when we could just solve it this month, right now, you know? So
I,
I think that's the way that you have to present some of these options.
just as a side note, one of the best things that could ever happen to a facility owner who has like a really, really strong brand and great service is to have a Planet Fitness open up right next door to you. A lot of people would be scared of that. That would be incredible marketing, because a lot of people, the people who do come in and the more serious ones that self-select to do well, but then they realize the limitations of that type of model, they're going to look and they're going to go, well, what's that? Right. And next thing you know, they walk in, they're like, holy shit, this is way next level. So, I mean, the chain of gyms that I work as a contractor in, I mean, shit, I would love to see a Planet Fitness open up next door to each and every one of them. It would be a giant boost to us, but we crush anyway. I think that's kind of the stuff that I wanted to pick your brain on. And honestly, this has been a really fun, insightful conversation. So where, actually, no, I know it was one more thing I was going to say. And this is what and you alluded to my media. I actually should tell people this more often. The way that I go about my various media, I do not think is a very good blueprint for most coaches. I do not think between the entirety of all my media that I have a consistent message to a narrow audience, but I'm going to explain. Okay. This will be interesting. So I started out mostly, the first like thing that I started doing, other than just coaching the general population client in person for a really long time, was this podcast. And when me and Dean started, we just couldn't help but have conversations that ultimately end up being for coaches. Now, do I mentor a small handful of coaches? Yes. Do I advertise it or broadcast it much? Hell no. It's definitely not a piece of my brand, but people ask me, so cool. Awesome. I'll do that. And I enjoy it, but I do not see myself as, you know, a business coach down the line. I like serving the end user like you do. Okay. So that's one. So the podcast is a little inconsistent with my theoretical, you know, client that I want to work with. Two, started writing for T Nation. Okay. So, you know, strength and conditioning stuff. I think that stuff's actually really solid on point. Probably a little bit more to a male audience. Same thing with Generation Iron. You know, some of the other things I've written for, sure, muscle fitness probably gets to be a bit more general, but I think it's still slightly men's health. Guys, my Instagram following is 63% women. My Instagram media is definitely directed primarily at a more general client enthusiast, who's probably the type of person I serve. But the other pieces of media are inconsistent with that. The public speaking that I get to do, I'm not doing talks for in front of like the general person I'm using. I'm using my media to try to serve. So there's all sorts of inconsistencies here. But here's where it all ties together. And it's a very inefficient path that I just stumbled onto. But what ends up happening when someone locally is looking for, like, they're doing the research, and they're not the person that's going to impulsively walk into Planet Fitness. They're the person that, you know, the lawyer who is doing a deep dive, wants to find the right trainer for her. This is literally one of my clients. Does a search, finds resources on on media, websites, etc. And I am writing for these big publications. The following may or may not be something that's meaningful to someone, but there's all these other things, the public speaking, and someone's going to go, that person is probably a lot more qualified than the trainer that I might get assigned to. And so that's my inefficient way of having people who are serious search and find me. I wouldn't try to tell someone else to recreate that. It was sort of a happy accident the way it worked, but hopefully it's kind of insightful. And I think a lot of people who are a bit more prominent in our industry, that actually is a bit of the story for them. But let's leave it at that. If you have any like last thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them.
Well, I think you kind of sold yourself short there, because I believe that everything that you do infers some type of domain expertise that people can glean from.
Fair.
So, and maybe it is because it's vast and there's kind of like channels for each avatar. But at the end of the day, someone's not going to look at any of your material and say, that guy's full of shit. He hasn't done anything. He's been on the couch for 20 years. You know what I mean? So,
Sure.
whether I'm like, when I look at your Instagram, if what you put out is for me specifically as an end user, no, but it might be for my client that gives me better insight. And that's why I said, like, it's voyeurism, you
And
know?
you hit on something huge, and this is what I try to tell trainers too. And we all say this, but this bears repeating. You're not writing to impress your peers, and you're not writing to impress other coaches. You're definitely not writing to impress the industry leaders. Okay. Most of them aren't watching, they're not looking. But the ones that know you and you have a relationship with, they're going to respect you and they're going to engage with and share your work. If it's so well crafted to serve the end user, that's what they will respect. And what one of the biggest things that pushed the earliest growth of my Instagram, and anyone who's listened for a long time heard me say this, is Dr. Mike Israetel, who I met in 2017, old friend, had dinner with him then. Anytime that there's an RP thing, I hang out with those guys, the whole team, Nick Shaw, they're all wonderful. But Mike started sharing my posts on his wall and tagging me, and it drove a lot of followers to me. Jordan Syatt once shared one of my posts in his story early on, and I gained 10% of my following overnight just because of Jordan, right? Because massive following. And again, you're not trying to appeal to these people. The stuff that they were sharing was stuff that served the end user, not something I think Dr. Mike is going to like this. Okay. When people write shit to try to impress Dr. Mike, it doesn't fucking work because no one functions on that fucking level. Okay.
Right.
So with that, where can people find you and consume more of your media?
Yeah. So the personal brand on Instagram is Michael Ranfone. I have a Facebook page. I'll be very honest. My social media is really bad because I go in waves, and it's like whatever I'm really thinking about at the moment, and a lot of it is for me. I craft so that I can audit or appraise what I'm actually doing in the business. So
Smart.
what's that?
Smart. That's smart.
And again, hopefully it serves someone else in some capacity. And like, I'm pretty active on social media. Like, I don't think I have one inquiry or one question that I have never answered. Like, I will get to your answers as long as you're not a bot from God knows where asking me to buy crypto or some shit. But honestly, like, everything that I do is a little bit self-serving in terms of like, because as a business owner, sometimes you don't get the constant feedback that you need. So I put stuff out there to get responses, and so that I can think deeper about the things that I have to get better at from a business perspective.
And there's another element to this too. And I have a presentation that goes really deep into this. And I think this is important is people will find you and search you and follow you if you have credibility and authority through other media, which means, respected person in the greater community, public speaking, maybe writing for some big publications, appearing on podcasts. And a lot of people look at these things and they look at these things as status flags. And I like to tell people these status is a byproduct of doing all these things well. And following will also be a byproduct of doing these things well. Most of the people in the industry who have larger followings, some of them are very savvy with the way they approach media, but some of them, it's not necessarily that they're super savvy with it. It's a simple fact that the impact and the footprint they've had through everything else they've done has made a lot of people go follow them. Chris Duffin's a great example of that. Eric Cressy's a great example of that. Brett Bartholomew. Molly Galbraith's very savvy with her social media, but Molly also happens to have the legacy of all the public speaking and everything she's done with Girls Gone Strong. And you can pick industry leaders and notable authorities. Mike Boyle, I don't think is necessarily like that concerned with like his social media stuff. A lot of people follow Mike Boyle because he's fucking Mike Boyle, right? And I can continue to grab onto examples up and down the line. So I still think that coaches will be well served to build their long form content. As you said, I mean, at the end of the day, it still comes from serving the person in front of you. But if you do such a good job at a really high volume of serving the person in front of you, there are going to be so many lessons, so much inspiration for creating and sharing other forms of like, take that knowledge, package it, and then give it to more people. That's literally the foundation of everybody who is well known in the industry, and they just kept building upon it, right? And then opportunities arose. That's the path if you really want to follow it, right? And it simply scales your ability to reach and help more people if you choose.
100%. And like, I don't know if it was Gary V who really, coined the term, but like, he's like the big jab, jab, jab guy, right? Like he gives,
Totally.
gives. And then you can ask. But if you just delay the ask longer and longer and you just keep giving, like I'd like to imagine on a long enough timeline that will come back in disproportional returns. And if it
Absolutely.
doesn't, you're still putting goodwill out there. So there's no downside.
And I think you're 100% right. I always use I explain it as you're making deposits into a bank of grace with everybody. And I think a lot of people very, very aggressively withdraw anything they bank, or they're overdrawn a lot of the time, right? There's the people who are asking for things, who are always selling. And I really do think that all the people that you look up to and you listen to, you've learned from in the industry, they're probably very good at having made a lifetime, a career of making a lot of deposits. And then when they turn around and they make an ask, they offer something, people line up. Like Ben Bruno. When Ben Bruno finally did an online program that he sold, what did he have? One, he had endorsements from a lot of the other people in the industry he was friends with. And two, he had a massive population of people who are following him. They're like, yes, please. Cool. They lined up for it and it was a smash hit. Yeah.
Right.
Right. Long overdue. Totally long overdue. So I think these examples serve well. Everybody listening, guys, thank you so much. As I always say, if I'm bringing someone on here, it's an endorsement of them. Go check out their media. Go follow them. Go look at what Michael's doing. Hopefully, you'll catch Michael at a public speaking event, and you and I we'll figure out a way to connect at some point.
Definitely.
And then if someone is newer to my media because you have found this episode through Michael, well, I often like to say, take a scroll through the legacy of guests that I've had on the podcast. You're probably going to find a lot of people that you look up to. You may enjoy some of those episodes and you may choose to stick around. I've got to earn it every step of the way. Everybody, thank you so much. Back next week.